Just as much as dreams can present us with things we fear, things we miss, and things we thought we'd forgotten, dreams can show us what we want the most. The word dream has a couple of meanings. The first refers to the images and sensations occurring in our minds during sleep, and the second refers to goals and ambitions that are extremely important to oneself. The Sega Dreamcast was named with the intention of it being a portmanteau of dream and broadcast, and looking back, I feel it succeeded in capturing both of the definitions of the word dream that I mentioned. Its best games oftentimes brought our most peaceful, vivid, and imaginative dreams to life. It created worlds and stories beyond even those dreams, and it enabled things that I feel showcased the unique and exciting nature of games as an art form. At the same time, it was Sega's last bastion, and it dreamt of the new millennium with remarkable insight into how games could be experienced, and what kinds of games we would be playing. Its focus on internet connectivity would be ahead of its time, especially thanks to its built-in modem, web browsing capabilities, online multiplayer, downloadable content, and more. Unfortunately, Sega's dream would be quickly cast aside by the ever-changing landscape of the games industry. The Dreamcast died soon after it got off the ground. While Sega of America and Sega of Japan continued their infighting during development of the Dreamcast, the resulting system overcame a lot of the faults of the Saturn, and it resonated far more than the Saturn did with most people. But it just could not compete with the rest of the 6th generation, despite its advantages and features. Author Stephen L. Kent, who wrote The Ultimate History of Video Games, said in an issue of Game Informer something that I couldn't have said better myself. If ever a system deserved to succeed, it was Dreamcast. Though its life was short, it was highly regarded, and remains so even today. Revisiting the Dreamcast today, knowing its story and the context surrounding its untimely demise, captures a moment in time where the world anticipated that games would change forever. It is a farewell to the industry as it was, and a prelude to where it was headed. In this video, I aim to explore all of that. I'm Liam Triforce, and this is a Dreamcast retrospective. In order to understand how the Dreamcast came about, we must first understand why its predecessor failed. I'd recommend you watch my Sega Saturn video for the complete story, but I'll mention a few key issues that plagued the Saturn from its inception all the way to its discontinuation. First of all, the hardware was difficult to develop for due to its dual processor architecture, and its geometric primitive was quadrilaterals rather than the industry standard of triangles. It was assembled primarily for excellent handling of sprite-based games, and while that went over well in Japan, the Western market was going all in on 3D games, which the Saturn was ill-equipped for. It could still do 3D well, make no mistake, just look at Nights into Dreams and the Panzer Dragoon series, but it wasn't easy to accomplish that for most developers. This also meant that porting work over from the PlayStation would not be straightforward, therefore decreasing the potential for third-party support. Developing for the PlayStation was infinitely easier for most. I mentioned a disconnect between the Japanese and Western markets. This is observable in the vast difference in Saturn library size between Japan and the rest of the world. To this day, the Saturn remains Sega's most successful console in Japan because it excelled at 2D. It didn't stack up to the PlayStation there after a while, but it held its own. This dissonance is not just observable at a consumer level, it ran deep within Sega on a corporate level for several years, culminating in the botched rollout of the Saturn in North America, and Sega practically rolling out the red carpet for the PlayStation.
$2.99.
Finally, there would be no original Sonic the Hedgehog platformer released for the system. Though the cancelled Sonic Extreme probably would not have single-handedly salvaged the Saturn, it would have helped it to survive a bit longer, at least in my opinion. Sonic Team instead developed original IP for the Saturn, like Nights into Dreams and Burning Rangers. They did prototype a 3D Sonic game on the Saturn, but they ended up not going through with it, and as you'll soon see, that was for the best. This led to the man who would become president of Sega of America during the Dreamcast development, Bernie Stolar, publicly stating that the Saturn was not Sega's future. Sega lost over $250 million over the course of the Saturn's life, and they decided to get started on its successor in order to recoup losses and learn from past mistakes. The final North American Saturn games were drip-fed to players over the course of 1997 and 1998, but after that, the Western market was left without Sega games for a whole year. Though this left Saturn owners out in the cold, being abandoned in favor of another console that they'd have to buy, sound familiar? Sega's re-emergence would be worthwhile. Things would not go smoothly, however. Remember how I mentioned disagreements at Sega on a corporate level? Well, there's the fact that Sega of America and Sega of Japan could never agree on anything, something that persisted throughout the Genesis and Saturn eras, and that I discussed further in my Saturn retrospective. But people within Sega of Japan could not agree with one another either. This was how Dreamcast development began. In 1997, Sega president Shoichiro Irimajiri opted to enlist Tatsuo Yamamoto of IBM to work on new hardware for Sega, deliberately working with an outsider to avoid the internal politics that had been plaguing Sega. Hideki Sato, head of hardware development, felt that any hardware development should take place exclusively within Sega, and this led to the creation of two teams, developing two separate hardware projects in isolation from one another. The good news is that Sega learned from the Saturn's custom processor being difficult to utilize, and both teams opted for more accessible PC-based components. This would be the first pioneering decision Sega made with the Dreamcast, as many more consoles to follow would source components from computer manufacturers. Codenamed Black Belt, Yamamoto's project would use 3DFX's Voodoo chipsets for graphics and an IBM Motorola PowerPC 603E CPU. Though these components were largely used in personal computers at the time, this prototype would not win out. Sato's project would initially be codenamed White Belt, followed by the codenames Dural, named after the Metallic Fighter and Virtua Fighter, and Katana. They went with Hitachi once again for the CPU, using the Hitachi SH4, though it would not be nearly as complicated to work with as the SH2 in the Saturn. As for graphics, they went with NEC's PowerVR 2. Ultimately, Sato's team won out, which led to 3DFX suing Sega and NEC for breach of contract. This lawsuit would unceremoniously reveal that Sega was prototyping new hardware as the Saturn was withering away. It would be settled out of court, but needless to say, the infighting at Sega was still very much alive, and other companies would be dragged into their scraps. That being said, both teams had the right idea for the hardware, clearly learning from the Saturn's missteps. Not only was it hard to work with, but it was expensive to manufacture, which is why Sega ended up hemorrhaging money when the Saturn wasn't catching on and they had to make price cuts. The Dreamcast's architecture being close to that of a PC meant that components were cheaper and it was easy to make games for. Despite this, the hardware was still efficiently designed, as its components work in parallel, much like the Saturn, to run its games. Its similarity to PC runs so deep in the Dreamcast veins that Microsoft made the Dreamcast compatible with Windows CE, an operating system typically used in handheld computers. You know, the original kind. Not like smartphones. If you look at the front of your Dreamcast, you'll see that Windows CE logo. And for the longest time, I had no idea why it was there. This would be Microsoft's first foray into the home console market, and the intent behind making the Dreamcast compatible with Windows CE was to make porting games to the console a breeze. Games that utilize Windows CE like Resident Evil 2 or Sega Rally 2 would display text that declared as much on startup. Even so, Sega's development tools and OS were chosen by most, and Microsoft would try again in the home console market with the Xbox a few years later. Honestly, this is just a testament to how developer-friendly Sega ensured the Dreamcast was. Speaking of which, Sega was still doing well for themselves in the arcades, and they would develop an arcade board, the Sega Naomi, around Dreamcast hardware, meaning that porting arcade games to the system would be seamless for pretty much anyone, and Dreamcast ports would often result in perfect conversions. Sega widely licensed the Naomi board to developers, including former rivals like Namco and Capcom, which resulted in there being many Dreamcast games being ports from the Naomi arcade hardware. We're going to be talking about a lot of Dreamcast games that are arcade ports today, and I do mean a lot. If you're not knowledgeable about Sega's history in arcades, then you're about to get a glimpse of the far-reaching impact they had on the industry, especially in the Dreamcast era. It's difficult to imagine this kind of thing today considering how the industry has shifted, but their arcade hardware enabled some wonderful games. Finally, the most important thing to note regarding the Dreamcast's pioneering features: a built-in modem for connecting to the internet, and there's a bit of history behind this. Though online connectivity on home consoles was still in its infancy, Sega had been leading the charge in downloadable content and online multiplayer for a few years at this point. In 1994, Sega launched the Sega Channel for the Genesis in partnership with cable television providers TCI and Time Warner Cable, which allowed players to download games through a coaxial cable straight to their Genesis. Though costly, it was probably the earliest equivalent to game streaming I can think of, even though it wasn't technically streaming. The entire game would be loaded into memory. It's closer to renting games from Blockbuster than streaming, or Nintendo Switch Online today. Players could check the Sega Channel website in order to see what was available to play at any given time. This gave Genesis players access to full cartridge releases, Sonic & Knuckles, Castlevania Bloodlines, Rystar, you name it, as well as games that would not be released on a cartridge in North America, such as Game Freak's Pulseman and the remake collection Mega Man The Wily Wars. While Sega Channel was a pioneering service when it comes to downloadable content in the games industry, the Sega Saturn's Netlink adapter would leave less of an impact. It would only be compatible with an exceptionally small selection of games, and it sold under Sega's expectations, but it was entirely peer-to-peer outside of Japan, so it didn't depend on servers to function. Hypothetically, if you wanted to play Virtual On or Saturn Bomberman with someone via Netlink, you could still coordinate that today. Fans have even managed to get the Netlink working with a high-speed connection. The Dreamcast's built-in modem was an attempt to consolidate all of their efforts into one console, and for it to be accessible. By connecting your Dreamcast to the internet, you would be able to browse and check your email, of course, but you could also play many Dreamcast games with people around the world, and download additional content and participate in events across multiple games. Since I missed the Dreamcast's prime, I've only ever taken my Dreamcast online once, but it was magical. When I was younger, I had a fascination with online gaming, but I only ever took my consoles online in the late 2000s, when we finally got wireless internet. My online experience prior to this was playing online over a computer, but the internet felt synonymous with the computer to me. That wasn't the case for my video games growing up. Something about taking old consoles online always felt magical to me, like I'd unlocked their fullest potential. When my friend hooked up an Ethernet cord to his PS2 and showed me Star Wars Battlefront online, it blew my mind. We were playing games with people around the world using this magic box that I figured would always remain hours alone when we played stuff like Grand Theft Auto and Jak and Daxter. Like I said, I missed out on the Dreamcast initially, but for those that were also too young to experience this monumental shift for the industry, imagine my reaction to taking the PS2 online, multiplied several times over, because the Dreamcast was the first to do it right, and make it a standard feature of the console. That built-in modem meant you could hook up your telephone line right to the console without any additional fees or peripherals, and you'd be off. And the Dreamcast took full advantage of that, including in some revolutionary games that we'll be discussing today. Certain missing features, however, would prove detrimental to the Dreamcast's continued success. Despite being a pioneer in many other fields, the Dreamcast controllers only have one analog stick. Of course, there was no way Sega could have predicted that it would become the industry standard, but 3D game design evolved quickly and eventually necessitated that second stick. That being said, the Dreamcast's Maple bus used to connect controllers to the console natively supports dual analog. They could have just as easily released a controller revision that would become standard, kind of like what Sony did with the DualShock. Quake 3 Arena and Unreal Tournament, for example, support dual analog control out of the box, and Virtual On had a twin-stick controller, just like the Sega Saturn game. But the Dreamcast did not live long enough for a proper dual analog controller to come to fruition. That probably would have happened had it not been for the Dreamcast's second blunder. Dreamcast games used the GD-ROM format, an optical disc developed by both Sega and Yamaha specifically for the system. GD-ROMs could hold up to a gigabyte of data and could be manufactured for a similar cost to the CD-ROM. which Sega opted for due to the cost of manufacturing DVD-ROMs, despite them being capable of holding far more data. This would prove to be a fatal mistake for the Dreamcast for reasons I'll get into later, but this doesn't mean it wasn't ever considered for the console's future. That's the thing. These features weren't missing because of an oversight on Sega's part. They wanted people to be able to expand their console at their own pace, while keeping the price of the console itself, and therefore its barrier of entry, low. Now that I think about it, that kind of sounds similar to what Sega did with the Sega CD and 32X, so who knows how it would have worked out. Much like the Dreamcast's native support for dual analog controls, so too was a DVD-ROM expansion in the cards for the Dreamcast, even before it launched in North America. Sega described the Dreamcast as an evolutionary console, something that would not remain static for its entire life on the market, but something that was modular and would evolve with the rest of the industry. It anticipated change in every corner, and that is precisely what made the console so ahead of its time. Its built-in modem, for example, could be removed and replaced with the Dreamcast broadband adapter, and this did end up being released since dial-up was already on its way out by the turn of the millennium. Accessories like the Dreamcast microphone would allow for voice chat and compatible online multiplayer games, paving the way for other home console multiplayer games to do the same. The Dreamcast keyboard could be used in conjunction with the Dreamcast mouse, not just to absolutely crush controller players in Quake and Unreal Tournament, but in order to browse the internet comfortably and transform your game system into a computer. Things like upgrading the system's video encoder to support HD TVs in the years to come. The company iOmega was working on a Dreamcast zip drive for transferring data to and from a computer, for save data transfer, multimedia playback, and even homebrew development. Sort of like NetYarose on PlayStation. Even upgrading the Dreamcast chipset was, quote, not out of the question. And of course, Sega intended for the GD-ROM drive to be upgradable to a DVD drive, a sentiment famously echoed by Bernie Stolar publicly. But none of this came to fruition, and that is all thanks to both internal politics at Sega and a little machine called the PlayStation 2. We'll talk about that when the time comes. Bernie Stolar often takes the brunt of a lot of the criticism when it comes to Sega's final years in home console development, and while some of it might have been justified, I don't particularly agree with all of it considering the difficult position he was in and the focus on 3D that Sega had to maintain in order to be competitive in North America, despite Japan primarily admiring its 2D library, a discrepancy that cost the console its life. Bernie famously did not view RPGs as profitable during the Saturn's life outside of Japan, but the truth is that no one really knew how successful Final Fantasy VII would be globally. Previous Super Nintendo RPGs found success worldwide in their own right, but it was FF7 on the PlayStation that single-handedly introduced JRPGs to a wider audience and paved the way for the genre being the powerhouse that it is today. No one could have seen that coming, and of course, Bernie changed his stance after that, championing games like Shenmue when the Dreamcast came along. Additionally, Sega wanted to remove the modem from the Dreamcast's North American launch in order to cut costs, and Bernie had to fight to ensure it would be included. Obviously, he succeeded, and thank goodness for that. This is similar to how the GD-ROM format was chosen to save money. I don't believe Bernie would have promised DVD compatibility for the Dreamcast if he didn't seriously believe it would happen. I cannot imagine how the Dreamcast would have performed without that modem, as it cemented the console as being far ahead of its time and something you could get a lot of mileage out of. The more I talk about the dreams Sega had for the console, its modular design and evolutionary nature, the more I pity the fact that it failed to remain viable in the end. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's circle back for a moment and talk about the console as it arrived to people on launch day. God, I love the look of this thing. The final design of the Dreamcast shell echoes the shape and off-white coloring of computers from the era. Looking at the Dreamcast, I am hit with flashbacks of me using the family computer in the early to mid-2000s to play games and browse the internet. The design is emblematic of a vision of the future of technology that made Y2K tech so fun to look at and mess around with. Then you have those triangles you can observe across the Dreamcast design, accentuating the futuristic look of the console and being embedded not just in the controller's start button, but also in the console's power light. You hear those infernal noises? Don't worry, it's thinking. The Dreamcast startup sound was composed by the late Ryuichi Sakamoto of Yellow Magic Orchestra. Both in and out of his work with the band, he was influential in creating atmospheric electropop, and pairing him with the Dreamcast proved to be a match made in heaven. Every time you turn this console on, it feels like a blank slate, divorced from the rest of Sega's branding, marketing strategies, and past failings. The beautiful, ethereal air chime conveys the console's namesake of broadcasting dreams perfectly. Every time I turn this console on, I am taken back to the dreams many held for Sega and for the interactive medium at large. When I hear this, I feel as though I am dreaming, and as mentioned, dreams can show us what we want most of all. This console, in spite of its brevity on the market, enabled that. It enabled that by laying the groundwork for the rest of the industry to build on, and by creating games that players could have only dreamed of beforehand. Even the Dreamcast menus seem to evoke this feeling. You have this beautiful sky in the background with water ripples that appear to be slowed, and the animated icons that bounce around as you hover over them. I also like that if your Dreamcast's internal battery is dead, it will always forget the current date unless you quickly reset the console while the date is loaded into memory. Since my Dreamcast battery is long dead, sometimes I just like to leave the date as is. Like, yeah, don't worry, sunshine, it is still 1998, you've got your whole life ahead of you. I regret not speaking about the controller in my Saturn video. The Genesis controller was beautiful for playing side-scrollers thanks to its comfy D-pad and its 3 big buttons all lined up in a row. In Japan, the Saturn came with an iteration on that controller, adding an extra row of buttons and 2 shoulder buttons on the top. It was perfect. The North American Model 1 Saturn controller decided it wanted to be unique. It was fine, the face buttons felt nice and everything, but the shoulder buttons barely had any give to them, and the D-pad just felt strange by comparison. I liked using the Model 1 controller for fighting games, but not anything else really. It was a downgrade, and Sega realized this because the Model 2 reverted back to the Japanese controller design, and all was right with the world. With the Dreamcast, 3D games had become standard and expected. Analog control was prominently featured and utilized in the Saturn's direct competitors. Whatever the Dreamcast controller would look like, it was going to look different. I can't say anyone could have predicted this. For a console's primary first-party controller, this is outlandish. I shouldn't cast aspersions though, because despite appearances, the controller is surprisingly comfortable to hold. The grips just settle into your hands, it has analog triggers which would also become industry standard, and the entire visual design of the controller complements the console itself, ushering in the new millennium with artful futurism and a sense of hope and beauty. It does have flaws like the strangely slippery analog stick that has no padding, as well as the aforementioned lack of a second analog stick which really held the system back in 3D games. But either way, for as outlandish as the controller looks, it is an extension of the console itself, and I couldn't imagine anything else. As for the little screen in the center, it is actually removable. This is the virtual memory unit, which not only acts as a memory card, but it also displays text and images while playing your games. Sometimes it would just cycle through static displays, but other times it would actually serve a practical purpose. In Resident Evil, you can view your health and ammo without having to pause the game. Kind of like the Wii U or Nintendo DS, now that I think about it. I guess you can add that to the list of things the Dreamcast did first. You could also download games to your VMU, sort of like the Pocket Station on PS1. This was famously used in the Sonic Adventure games, as you could send one of your Chow to your VMU and take care of them on the go, doing activities with them and giving them items, pretty much exactly like a Tamagotchi. Even if it was overshadowed by the Dreamcast's other features, I always found the VMU quaint, and thankfully, Sonic Team found a way to adapt this transfer feature in the GameCube ports by allowing them to connect to a Game Boy Advance, so long as the player had a copy of either Sonic Advance or Sonic Pinball Party, depending on which game they were connecting to. That's nice and all, not to mention the miniature Chow Gardens are more fully featured on GBA, but doing this is not nearly as convenient as it is with a VMU. I don't know, man. The Dreamcast had it all figured out. It could play fully featured games, you could use it like a computer and browse the internet, you could take it with you on the go in some form. It was equipped to deal with anything the future threw at it. Well, almost anything. The Dreamcast was first revealed on May 21st, 1998. Though Sega's reputation had been tarnished by the Saturn, the company was confident the Dreamcast would turn things around. Numerous pre-orders had come through for the system, though a massive chip shortage hindered its success initially. Difficulties mass-producing the PowerVR 2 chipset led to Sega halting pre-orders and reducing their projected number of units available at launch from 500,000 to just 150,000. I can almost hear 3DFX laughing at Sega's misfortune. Despite this, the console launched in Japan on November 27th, 1998, and the entire stock sold out the same day. Critically, most Dreamcast games released on launch day were not well received, except for Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle, but it was not nearly the system seller that the first game was, where people were so excited to play the first 3D fighting game that the Saturn was briefly beating out the PlayStation because of it. Of course, Virtua Fighter 3 was a good game, but this was concerning coming off of the Saturn's failure. On top of that, 2 high-profile games could not be finished in time for launch and had to be delayed. The anticipated port of Sega Rally 2 did not release until early 1999, while Sonic Team's project had been kept secret for most of its development, and although it was slated to launch with the Dreamcast, it would eventually be delayed to December 23rd. Hey, at least it was released in time for Christmas. Sonic Adventure was originally prototyped for the Saturn, but after that console's failure became clear, Sonic Team shifted to the Dreamcast while it was still codenamed Project Katana. Yuji Naka became involved with its development, meaning the hardware was developed in conjunction with what would become Sonic's first 3D platform game, much like Super Mario 64 and the Nintendo 64. Prior to this shift, the team traveled to Central and South America to gather inspiration for the game's story and setting, including places like Machu Picchu, the Nazca Lines, Pachacamac, Peru, and Tikal. While the inspiration is observable in the final game, Sonic Team took it a step further, with some of the photographs taken while traveling actually being used as textures in-game. Spectating sandboarding in Peru also led to a sandboarding minigame being included in Tails' story. They hiked through jungles, climbed mountains, encountered snakes and tarantulas, and lead programmer Tetsu Katano collapsed due to altitude sickness at one point. Their travels were documented on video, where you can see just how excited the team was. As you probably know and could observe from the dedication that went into creating the game's setting and narrative, Sonic Adventure aimed to fully reinvent Sonic for a new generation, while still staying true to the spirit of the character and his games. This extended to the look of the characters, which came about as a result of Yuji Naka liking a piece of promotional art that Satoshi Okano created for Sonic Jam. Realizing the opportunity to renew Sonic's character visually, Sonic Team held an internal competition to redesign Sonic. Ultimately, Yuji Uekawa's sketches won out. He initially used sharp, defined lines giving Sonic longer quills and a defiant smirk that would soon become iconic, and you can immediately sense an edge to the character that fit right in with street art and culture around the turn of the millennium. With original Sonic designer Naoto Oshima's guidance, Uekawa would redesign Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Eggman, the latter two receiving the most drastic changes. The whole cast appeared more mature without losing touch with what made them memorable in the first place. All of Uekawa's designs, as well as his impossible yet neat and free-flowing poses, were heavily inspired by graffiti art, leaning further into the game's artistic roots in street, and observable in the game's box art, which is still one of the best box arts ever illustrated for a game. Sonic jumps and rolls into a ball all of the time, and it's as though Uekawa captured a moment where Sonic is striking a pose mid-spin. The cover art for Sonic Adventure entirely conveys its sense of direction, including the narrative in its watery background, which is not meant to represent the serene beauty of the ocean and Emerald Coast, but the looming presence of chaos throughout the game's story. It is a testament to just how important box art used to be in this industry when attempting to sell a game. A lost art form. Accompanying Sonic's newfound visual identity were new sounds, and that included voice acting, which I won't go into because I have way too much to say about it in both English and Japanese, as well as the soundtrack, which evolved away from electropop and embraced hard rock. All thanks to Jun Senoe's love of the genre. Pairing his musical stylings with the new vibe for the Sonic series resulted in something truly beyond words. As mentioned, Sonic Adventure was kept close to Sega's chest for the majority of its development. Ahead of its reveal, a blurry screenshot leaked online that people immediately questioned the veracity of and discarded, even though it ended up being legitimate. Then, Sonic's trademark grin and newly established green eyes would become the first teaser for Sonic Adventure, set to be revealed at the Tokyo International Forum on August 22nd, 1998. Which is, to put it simply, one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Just look at how they reveal Yuji Naka here. You've got the team doing a goofy intro as you are introduced to their thought process behind creating the game, a fully edited video of their misadventures throughout Central and South America, tons of early Sonic Adventure footage that no doubt blew people's minds. And then Hiroshi Fujioka comes on stage in character as Segata Sanshiro and gets everyone to chant, which ends up being used as the chanting in the final game as Sonic transforms into Super Sonic to defeat Perfect Chaos. This is followed by the very first live performance of Open Your Heart featuring a young Jun Senoue having the time of his life. God, what an incredible way to reveal a game. Of course, I don't really need to say much about the game as I've already talked about it at length in the past, twice in fact, but I will anyway. Sonic's story is an incredible stretch of diverse levels and adventure field exploration, driven by just how effortless it is to control Sonic in this game. For his first 3D outing, it's impressive just how responsive he is at high speeds, and how much control you are afforded with the spin dash and spin dash jump, just like in the Genesis games. And to complement this paradigm shift, you were also given a homing attack in midair to assist with platforming and attacking enemies, a stroke of brilliance on Sonic Team's part. The levels are positively stuffed with memorable set pieces, making it feel as though the game is constantly evolving with a beautiful sense of pacing. And although there are scripted sequences, they read more like transitional spectacles than they do painfully obvious over-reliance like future Sonic games. I'm showing you examples of some of this game's best moments, but I honestly feel like the whole game constantly moves between ideas this great. Even in its quieter and more experimental moments, you are given a chance to enjoy yourself, and these moments still very much demonstrate Sonic Team's remarkable sense of imagination. Whether you're racking up rings in Casinopolis, solving puzzles in Lost World, or just experimenting with your moveset in the adventure fields a la Mario 64, there's still a lot to enjoy. I want to highlight the adventure fields in particular for creating some of my fondest memories with this game. I spent hours just seeing what I could pull off with my moveset, and checking every nook and cranny for emblems. For the sake of the sequel's plot progression and the wider variety of locales, I understand why adventure fields didn't come back, but these were the perfect sandboxes for each character's moves. That's the other thing. Like any good Sonic game, these levels have many routes and many ways for you to shave off seconds from your runs and get your ring counter up, both of which you are rewarded for with emblems. Building on the Genesis games' replayability, other characters' stories run in parallel with Sonic's, and their playstyles all offer something completely different, but true to their nature. Tails spends the first chunk of his playthrough in an effort to catch up to and surpass Sonic in friendly races, but he eventually gains independence and confidence in himself as he defeats Eggman all by himself. Naturally, his ability to fly plays a huge part in his stages, and his upgrades make him incredibly overpowered, but still a ton of fun to use. Knuckles got me to appreciate how cool it was to go through these same stages from a completely different perspective, and his solitary nature and dedication to the Master Emerald is adapted through you exploring these stages for 3 pieces of the Master Emerald, climbing and gliding just as Knuckles did on Genesis. I don't love all of Sonic Adventure. Amy's gameplay was slower paced, focusing on core platforming and rudimentary puzzle solving, while she swings her hammer around and runs from a robot, while Big the Cat probably shouldn't have been in the game at all. Thankfully, neither of their campaigns are very long, and they serve as forgivable mistakes in an otherwise well-executed game, one that I have replayed countless times over the course of my life. Another experimental gameplay style belongs to Gamma, whose story rises above the rest of the game for its surprisingly existential and poignant themes. If you haven't played the game, somehow, I won't spoil it. I love the way his gameplay functions, wherein you have to maintain combos throughout the level so that you don't run out of time, and that core concept would be fleshed out in the game's sequel. Speaking of which, the Chow Garden. Building on Nights into Dreams' experiments with virtual pets through the Nighttopians, the Chow serve the same purpose, but with a significant focus. Not only does raising your Chow and allowing them to inherit animals lead to more emblems, but you can also raise them by taking them with you on your VMU, like a Tamagotchi. They clearly wanted it to have a huge presence alongside the rest of the game, to the point where the sequel fleshes out the Chow Garden considerably, and I spent hours upon hours on that component in Sonic Adventure 2. The Chow Garden's inclusion is a testament to the game's scope, but that scope is definitely something they struggled with. If you thought the North American Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure was buggy already, the initial Japanese release was even worse. They barely made it over the finish line. But I honestly forgive them for all of the game's faults. Sonic Adventure left a huge impression when it was first released in Japan, and especially in North America, becoming the Dreamcast's best-selling game by a significant margin. I think one of the most important factors contributing to Sonic Team's absolutely stellar output in the mid to late 90s was that, from what I can tell, there was still a genuine sense of camaraderie at the studio, observable in the game's reveal at the Tokyo International Forum, and something that gradually vanished after Naka and Oshima's partnership was fractured and Oshima left the company, along with a handful of other employees, all of which were removed from the credits for Sonic Adventure DX on GameCube. This left Takashi Iizuka, director of Sonic Adventure, as the only major creative pillar of the partnership that once drove a lot of Sonic Team Saturn projects, while Yuji Naka would serve as producer until also leaving the company soon enough. Another factor is that at the time, much of the team was composed of passionate young artists in their 20s and early 30s, eager to bring unique ideas to the interactive medium through imaginative artistic direction and unorthodox game design approaches, as demonstrated in Nights into Dreams and Burning Rangers. You're going to see more of that throughout the Dreamcast's life as we examine more of Sonic Team's efforts on this console. The Saturn and Dreamcast was Sonic Team's golden age as far as I'm concerned. Now that we've gotten the obvious game out of the way, let's talk about the wide assortment of other games that made the Dreamcast so fantastic. The Dreamcast fell short of sales expectations heading into 1999. Before the console even launched in North America, Sega decided to reduce the price of the console from 29,000 yen to 19,900 yen, which meant the console would be unprofitable, but it did increase sales overall. One of its first major successes of that year came in the form of a game unlike any other: Seaman.
You know what really chaps my hide? It's how the English language is set up so that you never get a straight answer. For example, you might say, "This is one of the tallest buildings in America." But what does that mean? One of the tallest buildings. There is only one tallest building, correct? This is very confusing to me.
The Dreamcast mic was primarily used for voice chat, but Seaman famously made novel use of it by making it the primary method of interfacing with the creatures in your tank. You might think you have an idea of what the game is like, but trust me, nothing beats playing it for yourself. Let me walk you through my experience with it. At first, I had a hard time figuring out what I was supposed to do. I did my best to listen to Leonard Nimoy every time I turned the game on.
My name is Leonard Nimoy, and I will be your guide.
And I flipped through the instruction manual for ideas, which is hilariously written, by the way, and eventually realized I needed to make sure the tank was clean and warm every time I checked on my habitat. Good place to start, right? Then I dropped an egg into the tank, and that was my first day with Seaman. Yeah, so the process of actually reaching a point where I could verbally interact with Seaman took several days. The life cycle of these creatures takes place in real time. Naturally, I did what the game expected of me. I was patient and waited until the next day to care for my habitat. So I thought day 2 was going to be more of the same, but then, the miracle of life took place before my very eyes. The egg hatched, and little spermatozoa-looking creatures emerged. Of course, I had no idea what I was looking at first. These things like to cling to the walls of the tank and the surface of the water, and I was stumped from there. Thankfully, the instruction manual has directions for the specifics of your day-to-day operations when beginning your journey with Seaman. It also includes background on the man who discovered Seaman, Jean-Paul Gasset, who was mentioned in the game's intro by Leonard Nimoy. He disappeared shortly after publishing his thesis on Seaman and was shunned from the scientific community for his line of research after failing to keep Seaman alive and present physical evidence for his theories. He hypothesized that Seaman was responsible for transferring knowledge that proliferated during the Third Dynasty across oceans to other lands. This game is already amazing. Anyway, instructions. Let's start with mental preparation. Oh god. The most fundamental requirement for successfully raising Seaman is daily care and maintenance. Seaman is a game in which you will experience the growth of a living being. As with life itself, change only occurs over time, and even then, slowly. Okay, well, as I said, you can follow the basic operations for the first few days just to get things moving. Leonard Nimoy will even tell you about Seaman at each phase of its life, so you'll have everything you need to take care of the habitat. These little things that hatch from the egg are called mushroomers, and as it turns out, you are meant to awaken the Nautilus and have it eat them. The manual says, do not be alarmed by this behavior and continue on as normal. Okay. After a while, it will emerge from its shell, eject babies from the mushroomers it ate, and then die. The miracle of life, everyone. Now we have little baby gill men in here, and we can feed them and interact with them, but at this point they can't really articulate themselves. Hello, little guy.
Number.
Beautiful. In time, with daily care for the tank, food, and conversations, they will be able to articulate themselves more. Hello.
Hello.
Aw, this one seems down. What's wrong, little guy? Are you hungry?
No, too mad to eat. You make me mad. Blah, blah, blah.
Great, the gill man is going through its teenage angst phase. Eventually, the gill man will mature further and turn into a stingy little prick that will only talk to you when he feels like it.
Yeah, hello. Whatever. I have to tell you, your caregiving has left something to be desired. Please try to pay closer attention.
Oh, I see how it is. I feed you, I talk with you, I clean the tank every day, and yet when I accidentally let the heater run 1 degree too hot, you start complaining. So yeah, even if he does talk to you, he can be a little bastard. But if you ever catch him in a good mood, he'll have full-on conversations with you, and oh, when he does, he will ask you about every little aspect of your life, as well as your thoughts on politics and current events. Seriously.
There are a lot of really amazing things about the internet, but as with everything else, it's not completely perfect. Think of it this way. You can do almost anything on the internet. Work, shop, chat, get the news, play games, listen to music, and pretty much anything else you want to do. That's all terrific, but pretty soon people won't even need to leave their homes in order to conduct their daily business. You humans are going to get lazier and less mobile, and forget how to deal with each other face to face. I think things could get pretty ugly a few decades down the road. A place for everything and everything in its place. Isn't that how the saying goes?
Oh, Seaman, we should have heeded your words.
It's rather difficult making out what's on the other side of this glass, so let me inquire. Are you a male or a female?
Male.
Well, I was hoping to meet a lady, but I guess I'm not in a position to be too choosy, am I?
Sorry to disappoint, Casanova. The mic generally works well with this game. Very rarely does it have difficulty recognizing my words. It did lead to a pretty hilarious moment, though.
Tell me, what do you do for a living?
I'm a writer.
You're a firefighter?
No, I'm a writer.
You wait tables?
No.
You're a criminal?
No. No.
You're a nurse? You're a manager? You're a musician? You're a writer?
Yes! Yes!
Okay, I'm going to try this again.
When will my death come?
What day is your birthday on?
The 28th?
Wow, you've got the same birthday as Julia Roberts and Bill Gates. Perhaps you should call them up and ask them for money. I'll bet they'd love that.
I don't think I'm going to be doing that. That's the beautiful thing about this game. Everyone's responses are going to be completely different, so your daily conversations are going to branch off from any one person's playthrough. You can't see everything in one life cycle. It'll be personalized. And oh man, do these conversations get personal.
Are you married?
No, not yet.
Really? Hey, that's okay. Don't listen to people who say you need to get married. It's an antiquated notion, really.
I suppose you're right.
So listen, do you have any kids?
No?
I see. No kids. Are you thinking of having some in the future?
I'm not sure yet.
It's good that you're taking your time and being sure. That's very responsible of you.
I don't know, Seaman. I'm trying to stay on top of everything as it is. Now is not the time for me to be thinking about that.
Guess your generation isn't going to be the one that figures out how to exist without toil, eh?
Yeah. We can only hope we get there someday.
Do you like yourself?
Well,
You should like yourself. You can't count on anybody else to like you. Usually, if you believe that you are attractive, other people will think so too. Because at the very least, they will be attracted to your self-confidence.
fake it till you make it, right?
Well, that's good. You don't like everything about yourself, but it doesn't look like it's getting in your way. Good for you. Perhaps this is one time when you should take a cue from your friends. Of course, if they all decided to jump off a cliff, consult me before joining them.
Thanks, Seaman.
Let the mating begin.
Oh god, never mind! Anyway, beyond this, Seaman evolves further and eventually dies, but life can always start up anew. It's a bizarre structure for a game like this, but it offers up a dark and socially aware sense of humor, surprisingly prescient commentary on the world we live in, and a chance for players to genuinely look inside of themselves for a moment, as well as reflect on the people they surround themselves with. It might seem gimmicky for the game to entirely focus on these conversations as you care for the creatures in your tank, but the smart writing and off-kilter delivery absolutely sell the experience for me. Imagine coming home after a long day at work and talking to Seaman about this stuff. It would have helped me. It has helped me. This is a game that everyone needs to play for themselves at some point. Right, let's move on then. Though the Dreamcast was already in dire straits, it was looking like the North American launch would be a make-or-break moment for the console, and for Sega altogether, and things wouldn't get much easier for them from here. Electronic Arts announced before launch that it would not develop games for the system unless their sports games were the only ones featured on the system, which Bernie Stolar declined for an important reason. Some of you might not know this, but as far back as the Genesis, Sega was known for its high-quality sports games. With the Saturn lacking somewhat in that department, Sega purchased the developer Visual Concepts, who developed the 2K line of sports games. On Dreamcast, they developed NHL 2K, NBA 2K, and NFL 2K. While I haven't played them myself, I know they are highly regarded, so I figured I'd give them a mention. NFL 2K1 is one of the highest rated video games of all time, with a 97 on Metacritic. To say that the Dreamcast returned to Sega sports games to their former glory would be an understatement, and this would be just one of the things Bernie Stolar had lined up for the Dreamcast outside of Japan. After Sega catastrophically damaged its relationships with retailers with the botched North American Saturn launch, Bernie managed to repair those relationships and secured 300,000 Dreamcast pre-orders. He also worked with Peter Moore, who would spearhead a line of commercials to promote the system. Things were looking up, to say the least. The Dreamcast was set to launch on September 9th, 1999, or 9/9/99, and right before the day arrived, Bernie Stolar was fired. After ensuring the modem would be included with the console despite pushback from Japanese executives, repairing relationships with stores, and arranging a killer launch lineup including the acclaimed NFL 2K, he was let go. It's unclear what specifically caused his dismissal from the company, and I've only heard rumors, but what we do know is that he very much did not see eye to eye with then president of Sega, Isao Okawa. Internal politics and the dissonance between both branches of Sega plagued the company right up to the Dreamcast's launch, and even its eventual discontinuation. Nevertheless, the Dreamcast was indeed hugely successful at launch. It launched with 19 games, including Sonic Adventure, which was hotly anticipated and widely successful, and in 24 hours, Sega had sold over 200,000 Dreamcast consoles. Within 2 weeks, that number increased to 500,000. Sega was back in the game. For now. With Sonic Adventure headlining the Dreamcast, it was sure to be a hit, but I want to talk about some of the other games that made the launch so legendary. Soul Calibur is an obvious choice, and the series sadly remains dormant today, but when it was in its prime, I honestly preferred it to Tekken and Virtua Fighter. It's not as technically sublime as Tekken can be, but its weapon-based combat and 8-way movement system made battles so incredibly dynamic and gave way to fighting styles I hadn't really seen in any other fighting game. Ivy's sword, for example, can also transform into a whip, and is capable of so much at long range, but even up close she has a full suite of options. Sung Mina's got that Guandao for poking and juggling, Siegfried's got a sword the size of Guts' Dragon Slayer. I could go on, really. The roster is solid due in large part to their weapon diversity, and that diversity informing their playstyles. Building on the foundation laid by Soul Edge on PS1, I think the reason I continue to recommend Soul Calibur is not just because of what it brings to the genre on its own, but also because it is fairly easy to grasp. 2 weapon attack buttons, one for horizontal attacks and one for vertical attacks, a guard button, and a kick button, without trading that accessibility for depth in any way. There are so many moves in this game and so many ways to convert things into combos if you really want to. This is a huge part of why Soul Calibur clicked with me all those years ago, but it's not the only reason. Soul Calibur also historically features robust single-player offerings, and that is true even for this first game. I didn't spend as much time on this game as I did the Weapon Master mode in Soul Calibur 2, but Mission mode here is still a ton of fun, and I believe Soul Calibur should have set the blueprint for all single-player modes in fighting games moving forward. You go through a series of battles with each character to unlock costumes and artwork, and meeting the criteria in each battle proved to be a surprisingly addictive means of challenging myself. Because it was such a perfect arcade conversion, the game played beautifully, and it had so much to offer beyond the core fighting. I'm honestly not surprised by the fact that Soul Calibur remains one of the highest rated games on Metacritic. Yes, that means the Dreamcast is home to 2 of those games. 3 if you count the Dreamcast port of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which is still probably my favorite version of that game. This might seem baffling to those of you that weren't around for Soul Calibur, but it was such a refreshing and well-designed game, and it genuinely felt like it had something to offer for everyone. The series had a hard time finding meaningful ways to evolve as it continued on, but I maintain hope that someday we will be welcomed back to the stage of history. While we're at it, the Dreamcast was home to a host of excellent fighting games and fighting game ports, and one of those games was made available at the Dreamcast North American launch, Power Stone. Though these games are somewhat obscure today, you will have definitely seen its influence on other party fighting games throughout the 2000s. Do you remember Shrek Super Slam? How about the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, the game? Or perhaps the One Piece Grand Battle series? I played all of these games growing up, and I was somewhat confused by the fact that they all seemed to share DNA. As it turns out, they were all cut from the same cloth. That cloth being spun and woven by Capcom in 1999. And that cloth was of a much higher quality than anything its imitators came up with. Power Stone is an arena fighter with basic movesets, tons of items, a difficult but rewarding dodge mechanic to master, and a mad dash between up to 4 players to hoard 3 Power Stones and pull off special moves. The games are easy to pick up and play, and they are an absolute blast with friends. One of its standout features, at least for me, is its instantly memorable character designs courtesy of Akira Yasuda, which weave cute with cool thanks to features I find reminiscent of Osamu Tezuka's work, notably the roundness of the eyes and faces. As much fun as the first game still is, I feel Power Stone 2 is superior in pretty much every way. The stages dynamically shift and evolve as the matches go on, forcing players to constantly stay on the move as they hop between boats, climb scaffolding to reach the top of a castle, fall into the traps of an ancient temple. It's all really cool. A lot of other multiplayer party games use luck in their design in order to somewhat level the playing field, but I believe Power Stone achieves the same effect through chaos, which I find largely preferable. Of course, Power Stone 2 also features more characters and an adventure mode, taking a cue from Soul Calibur and its reinvention of how a fighting game can function when playing alone. A lot of the game's best items are locked behind adventure mode, so if you want to spice things up for your next game night, it's a good idea to pour some time into the game, improve at it, and unlock everything. I really miss doing this, by the way. The industry has shifted away from this for the sake of monetizing a game's longevity through battle passes, DLC, seasons passes, sponsorships, and whatnot, and I understand why this is happening for sure, but if I want to unlock a swimsuit for Tina in Dead or Alive 5, then I should be able to challenge myself and work for it like I could in the previous games. Dangle that carrot on a stick in front of me, man. Don't make me pay more for content that could have been unlockable. I'd respect the game a lot more. Anyway, if you want to play Power Stone today, Capcom Fighting Collection 2 contains ports of the original Naomi arcade games, with rollback netcode and everything available to you from the start. And yes, these are the first of many Naomi games we'll be talking about today. Since we're talking about fighting games, I need to run through some of the Dreamcast's best. This was the place to be for great fighting game ports back in the day. It was an absolute beast in this genre. From Capcom alone, we had Power Stone 1 and 2, but then there was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2, Capcom vs. SNK 1 and 2, Project Justice or Rival Schools 2, Techromancer, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I mean, damn! That's kind of a stacked lineup, isn't it? I'm probably missing some too. As for the games I have experience with, let's start with Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. The game was largely passed up when it was making rounds in arcades, probably due to its focus on its new characters, including Alex, who was intended as the primary protagonist of Street Fighter 3, and its absence of familiar favorites from the previous games. Chun-Li wasn't even playable until Third Strike came out, skipping the original and Second Impact. Then EVO 2004 happened. Everything that makes Third Strike such an amazing game can be observed in this clip alone. From its gorgeous sprite work and sprite-based animation, which was an art form that would be on its way out as the 2000s progressed, to its aesthetic as a street fighting spectacle, to its sharp gameplay, complemented beautifully by its central mechanic of parrying. If I were to summarize this game with a mantra, it would be, just go for it.
Go for it.
And the parry mechanic is the perfect embodiment of that. The parry, used by Daigo Umehara to great effect in that famous clip, is Third Strike's defining feature, the result of further refinement over previous versions of 3. If you make a forward input in time with an attack, or down if it's a low attack, you will parry the attack and take no damage, not even chip damage which you would otherwise take from guarding special moves. I believe so long as the input is not held, you have a 10-frame window to input a parry against an attack. If you successfully parry an incoming attack and your enemy is negative, you will be free to do whatever you want to them. It's incredibly risky, because if you mistime it, or fail to parry a move or combo with multiple hits, you open yourself up to whatever punishment your opponent can serve up. But the reward is oh so tantalizing if you can spare the health, and you know your character well enough to punish your opponent instead. You can probably understand now when Daigo had only one little sliver of health remaining in that match, why parrying each hit of Justin Wong's super perfectly, and then following up with a combo to win the round, was such a powerful moment. Couple this with the already crisp and finely tuned core gameplay of Street Fighter as it is, and you just have an absolutely stellar game on your hands. But that's not the only thing that makes this game so good. It dares to be different not only in its core gameplay, but in its roster and its aesthetic, all embodying the rugged artistry of street culture. Few characters in Third Strike's roster returned as series regulars, but damn, do they ever make an impression. Dudley, Hugo, Elena, Makoto, Ibuki, Q, the list goes on. The aforementioned Akira Yasuda worked on this game, designing Elena and Ibuki, among others. So many memorable designs and personalities, and so many individualistic fighting styles, all elegantly realized through solid game design, gorgeous animation, and detailed sprite work, and some killer music backing them all up. That's really what this game is all about. So what if this game's roster is largely unfamiliar? That's the point. Pick a character that seems cool to you, and just go for it. I can't help but respect how this game takes risks, and dares the player to do the same. Not just in the roster, but its central mechanic too. And to sum up that notion, let me tell you about a character that I have been desperately trying to make viable for myself, despite my intermediate proficiency at Street Fighter. All thanks to his theme music. This is a masterpiece of drum and bass embodying Akuma himself and the surge of adrenaline that comes with taking great risks that pay off in the heat of battle. When I hear this theme, I am one with my character. No outside stimuli can disrupt me. My mind is clear and focused solely on the game. The thing is, while playing Akuma should be easy for me as I started playing Street Fighter as Ryu and Ken, Akuma's defense is pitiful compared to the rest of the cast, meaning he takes a lot of damage. In order to consistently hold my own as Akuma, I need to know Third Strike's roster inside and out, and be able to anticipate my opponent's moves. But remember that mantra. Just go for it. Imagine being able to parry into Raging Demon to win a match while that theme is playing. I am currently chasing that feeling. You might be able to tell from these musical stylings, but a lot of Street Fighter 3 is dripping with the sensibilities of the turn of the millennium. And while that gave it a sense of identity that it absolutely deserved to have, I think that contributed to it not resonating as much with general audiences at launch. Ironically, I feel like it would be the last Street Fighter game to have such a strong sense of direction until Street Fighter 6, 2 decades later. Okay, I know I had a lot to say about Third Strike, but I don't want to overshadow the others despite my inexperience with them. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a legendary game that is a love letter to fans of both, and simply one of the coolest fighting games ever created. 3v3 team battles in which you can tag in and tag out characters strategically in order to create combo opportunities, cancel moves, and maintain a pool of health with backup characters. MVC2 executed this so well that it would serve to inspire other fighting games moving forward, like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Skullgirls. This also just served to fuel ridiculous team-ups like Cammy, Magneto, and Roll from Mega Man. I'm gonna win a match with Roll on my team someday. Capcom vs. SNK is also technically a 3v3 fighting game, but you can't tag characters in or out mid-match. They each act as an extra life, so to speak, which itself invites a different kind of strategy to battles. And yes, all of these games I've mentioned were ported to Dreamcast. With Third Strike and MVC2, you already have 2 heavy hitters, but the list just keeps growing. If you're not great at traditional fighters but want something else, Techromancer is a mech fighter with a great sense of style, just like Power Stone, right down to the energetic, colorful, and distinct character designs, the interstitials between battles like a children's anime, and the logos for each fighter even making them feel like they each hail from their own series. The combat, while simple, is super effective, and for a game like this, that's all you really need. It's a lot of fun. Beyond Capcom, there was Virtua Fighter 3, Team Battle, and Fighting Vipers 2 from Sega. But speaking of Dreamcast 3D fighting games, I do feel that Soul Calibur holds the crown for best 3D fighter on the Dreamcast, but second, and only by a small margin, is Tecmo's Dead or Alive 2. God, I love these games, and not just for the reason you think. It's only like 60% of the reason why. 65%. Okay, I could make jokes about how difficult it is to play this game one-handed, but like, Dead or Alive is surprisingly high execution. Some of you might know this, but Dead or Alive was built on the Virtua Fighter engine, which leads to its basic inputs being the same. Punch, kick, and guard are all there, and combo building functions similarly between both games, but then there's the hold input, and this is where Dead or Alive's skill ceiling skyrockets. Hell, even its barrier of entry is higher thanks to this. Depending on whether your opponent is attacking high, mid, or low, you can perform the correct hold in accordance with that attack to counter them and lock them into a grab. It takes a lot of long hours to get proficient at this system, but when you land a hold, it always feels gratifying, like you've completely outsmarted your opponent. Funny enough, Dead or Alive 2 is still a strong contender for the best game in its own series, and I agree with that in terms of content, though I'd say my personal favorite is Dead or Alive 5 Last Round mechanically. With DOA 7 on the horizon, by some miracle, there's never been a better time to give the games a shot. There's also Guilty Gear X, Fatal Fury Mark of the Wolves, and King of Fighters Dream Match 99. I've only played Guilty Gear out of these 3 games, but man, what a roster. I mean, of course there's no Tekken, but you honestly don't need it with a lineup like this. Just as Sega's focus was with ports during the Saturn era, the Dreamcast was like having an arcade in your home. If you and your friends owned Dreamcast arcade sticks, you could play whatever fighting games you wanted in the best way imaginable. This is an open invitation to my friends watching this video. If you all want to play Third Strike again sometime, my door is open, and my Dreamcast is plugged in. Or, you know, we could use Fightcade and play online with rollback without having to leave our homes. Whatever, man. I just like to have you guys over and see your beautiful faces. Anyway, pivoting back to the Dreamcast launch for a moment.
Hydro Thunder!
This is such a classic feeling arcade racing game, and after Wave Race 64 demonstrated what water physics can add to a racing game when done right, I was delighted to discover this game in a Metal Jesus video many years ago. It has a simple premise of maintaining boost by collecting it along the tracks and using it well, in addition to going off of ramps and jumps, crashing into other boats, and bouncing on waves. It's the perfect pick-up-and-play kind of racing game. Speaking of which, the Dreamcast has 4 controller ports, not only because it makes using accessories like the VMU, in conjunction with the keyboard and mouse easier, but also because it means, like the Nintendo 64, 4-player local multiplayer out of the box, and no game better illustrates this than Sonic Team's own Choo Choo Rocket. Okay, so everyone has their corner, and they're trying to reroute the wandering mice so that they can enter their rockets. Other players can hover over and mess with your routes too. While all of this is going on, various things can happen if you collect a pink or red mouse, like shuffling the rockets around, sending cats all over the place that can hurt your score, and mouse mania, which is perhaps the most chaotic effect because everyone is suddenly scrambling to monopolize on the amount of mice on screen. It's hard to sell just why this game is so much fun with words alone. Once you grasp the controls and the object of the game, I feel like it will immediately click. It's the kind of game that will make you hate your friends amidst the chaos, but you'll be laughing the whole time, so it's fine. Choo Choo Rocket was also the first online multiplayer game on the Dreamcast, something that Sonic Team would expand upon in their next game. We'll talk about that soon enough. Speaking of accessories, I think it's high time we talked about the Dreamcast fishing rod. Arguably one of the system's greatest achievements. It is exactly what you think it is, and it functions as you'd expect, complete with a reel on the side of the controller. When playing Sega Bass Fishing, for example, you can use the analog stick to move the rod while reeling fish in, but it can also detect movement if you decide to physically lift and move the rod around, meaning that you can actually pull against the direction a fish is swimming in real life while reeling it in. I just stuck to the analog stick, but this was a pretty early attempt at motion controls, so I guess you can add that to the list of things the Dreamcast pioneered in this industry. Sega Bass Fishing is a fun game, with an extremely enthusiastic announcer.
Oh, a big one!
But I am partial to Sega Marine Fishing myself. Released a year later, it focuses on catching huge and varied species of fish, and the vibes are immaculate. Ambient drum and bass is my lifeblood, man. The fishing controller would only be compatible with the few fishing games released on Dreamcast, excluding Big the Cat's campaign and Sonic Adventure ironically, as well as 2 other games you would never expect. Remember how I said the fishing controller was perhaps a pioneer in motion controller peripherals? Well, I wasn't joking when I said that. This is Virtua Tennis. It's a great game on its own, delivering on sharp controls and gameplay, and an addictive world circuit mode. What does this have to do with the fishing controller? Well, it's because you can swing the fishing rod like a tennis racket to play the game. Yeah, just like Wii Sports. This game beat Nintendo to the punch by several years. You can also play Soul Calibur by swinging the rod. You swing it horizontally for horizontal slashes and vertically for vertical slashes. Why not? Still a better experience than Soul Calibur Legends on Wii, by the way. Speaking of swinging a sword around, yeah, you like that eloquent transition? Let's talk about a lesser-known Dreamcast game called Maken X. Believe it or not, this is actually something of a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei franchise. I mean, it's obvious when looking at the game's box art, thanks to Kazuma Kaneko's style being front and center, and the game's visuals translate that style quite well, but the gameplay is completely unrecognizable as SMT. At the time, SMT was only just getting its feet wet in North America. Jack Brothers would be the first game to be released here in 1995, and it was a Virtual Boy spin-off. Don't know why Atlus thought that was a good idea. Persona 1's abhorrent localization was released here in 1996, while only Persona 2's second half was released here in 2000, despite that localization being far more faithful. Finally, the first main series SMT game to be released here was Nocturne in 2004. After a ton of games in the greater franchise got a chance first. Maken X would be sandwiched in between these efforts, likely thanks to its standalone universe and gameplay style. It would be the first game to be directed by Persona 3, 4, and 5 and Metaphor ReFantazio director Katsura Hashino. As you can probably tell from the footage here, Maken X is a first-person action game where you swing a sword around, you can brainjack other characters to inherit their unique abilities, level them up, and even obtain different endings, depending on the characters you choose to control. The narrative is nonsense, and the English voice acting is awful, but the core combat and leveling is actually solid. Dodging is responsive and satisfying, especially when followed up with a weak point strike. The various movesets are fun to experiment with, and you can even reflect certain projectiles with your sword. I would honestly recommend checking this game out if you have any interest in Atlus or action games on the whole. Our next game, however, I would not recommend, but I bring it up for being an oddity in its own franchise. And it also happens to be about swinging a sword around. Yeah, nailed that transition too. This is Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc Chapter of the Flowers of Oblivion, or, as it was more widely known in English, Sword of the Berserk Guts' Rage. Gotta love that Miura's violently beautiful and detailed cover art here was shelved in favor of this monstrosity. I've wanted to talk about this game in some capacity for a while. This would be the first Berserk-related piece of media to be released officially in English. Before Dark Horse Comics started publishing the manga, and before the 1997 anime adaptation was licensed by Media Blasters. And yet, it takes place after the Golden Age. Imagine playing this at launch, not knowing what Berserk is, seeing Casca, and wondering why she was acting like that despite being a grown woman. I want to meet that person and see how they handled finding out why. This localization was so early, in fact, that in the English version, I recall Puck switching between pronouncing Guts' name correctly and saying Gatsu. Seriously.
This mean-looking guy is Gatsu.
Even some of the names in the glossary are mistranslated. If you're used to the Dark Horse Comics translation of Berserk, you're gonna have a field day reading through this stuff. If the game had come out a little bit later, we could have had Mark D. Rayson as Guts in the English version. If only. This game isn't very good, but there are ideas in here that I admire. For one thing, it features music by Susumu Hirasawa, the composer for the 1997 series, and that alone completes the atmosphere of the game. It was also released around the same time as a certain other Dreamcast game that pioneered QuickTime events, but this game uses them in a novel way. Rather than killing players if they fail, the game can send them to a branching path in the same level, which gives this ultimately short game some replayability. Other than that, it's largely mediocre, though I am somewhat more forgiving towards it than I otherwise would be, thanks to it being an early 3D action game. The Dragon Slayer somehow manages to feel simultaneously weightless and incredibly stiff to swing around, which is not at all what such a sword should feel like to swing, and when you're in an enclosed space, you'll keep bouncing it off of walls by accident. Despite this, combining light and heavy attacks isn't always the worst thing in the world, and you can pull off some nifty techniques and combos with the other things in Guts' arsenal. Perhaps the game's crowning achievement in adapting Guts into a video game is in the arm cannon's utility. You can only use it sparingly, but when you find the right opportunity to do so, it's a euphoric shotgun blast that completely decimates enemies. So there is some good in here to enjoy, but not a lot. The game's difficulty fluctuates violently in specific parts of the game, and you can only save your game after clearing entire episodes, not just when the game says clear, which is incredibly inconvenient, but at least the game is short. The story was penned by Miura himself, and while I don't think it is exceptionally told due to the game's awkward pacing, being about 50% gameplay and 50% cutscene, and featuring very awkward animation where characters glide between keyframes with no tweening or sense of stillness, as well as being standalone and unimportant in the grand scheme of Berserk's story, I find it interesting for 3 reasons, to the point where regardless of whether or not the story is canon to the manga, I still found myself invested. First of all, the main villain of the game, who might as well be named Ballsack, uses Rita's pendant, a Bayolet, to transform into an apostle. I guess we can add him to the list of known apostles in the Berserk canon. Second, the Skull Knight rides in at the end of the game and swallows that Bayolet. Finally, in accordance with the Mandragora being central to the plot, there is a brief scene where Casca's exposure to it results in her sanity being briefly restored. When this happened, I actually felt tears well up in my eyes. Again, I don't think the game is very good, but as someone who was deeply, deeply affected by Berserk, I do not regret buying and playing through this game. Okay, moving on. Though the Dreamcast library is much smaller than the Saturn's, you absolutely can find a few overlooked gems if you know where to look. This is Gunspike, known as Cannon Spike outside of Japan, and named after Cammy's move of the same name in Street Fighter. You can actually play as Cammy in this game too, as well as Mega Man. And Baby Bonnie Hood from Darkstalkers. Though it begs to be playable with a twin-stick configuration, I got super addicted to this game while recording for this video. It's not long, but it makes up for that by being a hell of a fun time. And you can play through it with a friend too. Another game that has definitely seen more attention lately is Illbleed. A spiritual successor to the launch game Blue Stinger, which I still haven't played, sorry. You go through haunted houses inspired by B-movie horror films, taking your time to identify and disable traps based on what you can pick up with your senses. You can also mark things that could be traps just to be safe, but you don't want to waste adrenaline doing so. However, for every successfully identified trap, you will earn adrenaline back. Other than that, it is structured like a typical survival horror game for the era, but its mechanics are so unique that I'd recommend anyone who has an interest in survival horror check it out. I don't think it executes every element well, combat is pretty bad and not in the endearing Silent Hill sort of way, and I think it can at times feel largely like a giant memory game, which is probably why the game didn't click with me like it did for others. That being said, it has a strong cult following. When you consider the fact that it was a late Dreamcast game that sold poorly, and it is a survival horror game, it's no wonder it's going for outrageous prices now. Typing of the Dead isn't really overlooked so much as it is an oddball in the House of the Dead franchise, but I have no idea where else to put this in the video. This is exactly what it sounds like. It is a typing game where you use the Dreamcast keyboard to kill zombies. Characters wear Dreamcast backpacks and keyboard harnesses and run around fending off the undead with their typing prowess. The faster you type and the fewer the mistakes, the better you'll perform. You even have to know how to prioritize targets and use items in this game. It's easily the best typing game I think I've ever played, and to be fair, those are few and far between. But I just don't see a game topping this in my lifetime. Do people still make typing games like this even? Also, when it comes to the voice acting, I don't throw around the term Oscar-worthy much, but when I hear performances like these,
I have made a creature to rule over mankind.
I know I'm witnessing a miracle, to say the least. Seeing as this whole game is basically satire, though, it has to be intentionally bad. It has to be, right? This game is just so entertaining to play through. I could honestly play it over and over again on the hardest difficulty. At one point, I think one of the programmers for this game went rogue and started venting their nihilistic frustrations into the game. Life is hell, my job is hell, boring as hell, eating is hell, living is hell, short of savings, got no hope, Nothing but time. Can't die either. Bro, are you okay? As for imports, there weren't as many import games for the Dreamcast as there were Saturn, but there are some gems. Let's start with this one. I gotta tell ya, it is weird seeing the From Software logo pop up in a Dreamcast game. This is Frame Gride, a customizable mecha fighting game similar to Virtual On, which had a sequel on the Dreamcast. And while I haven't played the Virtual On sequel, I can say that Frame Gride has an atmosphere about it that I vastly prefer. Something about the mecha being medieval adjacent and having them fight in the open expanses of nature. It's like if they shot Pacific Rim in New Zealand. You're kitted out with all kinds of weapons, and you can even send out a squire to fight for you, but for the most part it's a one-on-one deathmatch between you and another mech. And it's a visceral kind of fighting game that evokes such a childlike sense of excitement every time I land a full sword combo, or a cannon blast on my opponent. It doesn't just have a story mode though. You can play against someone in either local or online multiplayer as well. The Lost Golem is a simple puzzle game where you escort the king to the goal by creating and manipulating walls. That's pretty much all I have to say about the game itself, but there's a sad story behind its existence. I cannot find a verifiable source behind this other than one paragraph on the game's Wikipedia page, but if I am to actually believe that the game only sold under 500 copies, then looking at the golem's sad, expressionless face against that melancholic sunset suddenly hits a lot harder than it did initially. This poor golem was almost truly lost had it not been for Dreamcast collectors rediscovering him. Sakura Wars 3 and 4 are games I've had my eyes on since playing the first two games for the Saturn video, and I've heard great things about them thanks to their improvements on the core gameplay of the first two. Unfortunately, the games have yet to be translated by fans, aside from translations of the game's cutscenes on YouTube, and my Japanese is getting to the point where I'd probably be able to understand the broad strokes of the plot and dialogue, but I want to fully appreciate these games, so I'm continuing to hold off. But after the resounding success of Sakura Wars in Japan during the Saturn's life, just know that these two were also quite successful, and I have no doubt that they are quintessential games to the Dreamcast. When I play these games, I might write about them on my website. Oh yeah, I guess this is a good place to announce that I have launched a website where I'll be writing about media and other things pertaining to my life and the channel. The blog is the most important part of the site, and you can leave comments on posts and whatnot, but you can also sign the guest book and get in touch with me via the contact form. There's even a music button. Anyway, there are a couple of other imports that I wanted to play for this video, but didn't. Love Delic, the developers behind Moon, an RPG that remixes and satirizes the genre, and heavily inspired Toby Fox when creating Undertale, made a Dreamcast life simulation called LOL, Lack of Love, that I've always wanted to play. Those developers also went on to form a new studio and create Tulip and Rule of Rose for PS2. Another game I've desperately wanted to play through is Segagaga, a self-referential RPG and simulation game where you attempt to save a financially failing Sega from their evil rival Dogma. Yeah, a whole game satirizing the situation Sega was in sounds like something I'd love considering all the effort I've gone through to tell Sega's story. We'll talk more about imports later on in this video, especially the shmups, as they kept the Dreamcast alive for years after it was discontinued. As an aside, I just want to get some games out of the way that I wanted to include but couldn't for one reason or another, and to save myself a few comments asking where the hell they are. Grandia 2. I didn't play the first one for the Saturn video, and sadly this means I haven't played the sequel. D2 for the same reasons. Bangai O. I tried to record it, but it is one of the few Dreamcast games that doesn't support a VGA connection, so I decided to save it for a Nintendo 64 video, since it came out there first in Japan. Don't worry, a certain other treasure game for Dreamcast will still be mentioned. Samba de Amigo. This is perhaps one of my most egregious exclusions from the video, but I tried my damnedest to get a hold of the controllers at every game store near me, and it just didn't happen. Yet another game demonstrating Sonic Team at their most creative and talented, something we've seen throughout this video. Spawn in the Demon's Hand. 3D fighting game based on the comic book character developed for the Sega Naomi board. Just never got around to playing it. Sorry. Same goes for Elemental Gimmick Gear, Blue Stinger, and Floygen Brothers. I'm probably forgetting a few more, but those were games that I had on my list but didn't have the time to play. Of course, if I haven't mentioned a game you like, there's still hope it will appear in this video. It's not over yet. Keep hanging in there. Some games I've excluded from this video are going to upset people, but I just try to focus on games I am personally interested in, games that are important to the console's history, and games that I actually am able to play without financial or logistical hurdles. That's just how it goes. Alright, time for the heavy hitters. Hit it! And that is as much of that song as I can play. What an attention grabber to have in an arcade, though. Crazy Taxi is simply one of Sega's best arcade games, and the Dreamcast port makes it even easier to practice advanced techniques, and you even get an additional level to drive people around in. Crazy Taxi's physics feel as though they were finely tuned to be as unrealistic as possible, to the point where you will be bouncing and swerving all over the place like a bat out of hell, all for the sake of someone who really needs to get to KFC. For the longest time, I've wanted to get good at this game. Most runs I'd attempted ended with me earning a D-class license. Was that my best? I don't think so. It was clear to me that I needed to learn things like the Crazy Boost and Crazy Drift if I ever wanted a chance at a higher rank. So I did. I buckled down. For the Crazy Boost, all you really have to do is throw your taxi in reverse without having your foot on the gas, then switch to drive and very quickly hit the gas. If you hear the sound of the engine going into overdrive, you'll know that you've done it correctly, and you can keep doing it in rapid succession to just fly through stages. The Crazy Drift is a bit trickier to pull off, as you have to brake, then switch to reverse, then drive, and turn hard all in rapid succession, and I still don't feel like I really have my drifting down, especially in levels this densely packed. But after all was said and done, I drove as fast as possible, I took risks to get combos and increase my fare, and I was strategic about which passengers I took on, and I finally earned my first S rank. And I know it won't be the last. I could pop this game in anytime. Now all that's left to do is take what I've learned to the arcade machine near me and show off for strangers. I take what I can get in this life. Speaking of driving games, the Dreamcast had quite a few, and I could mention several of them like Tokyo Extreme Racer or San Francisco Rush 2049, but I think the Dreamcast game in this genre that compelled me most of all, aside from Crazy Taxi of course, was Metropolis Street Racer. This is the precursor to the acclaimed Xbox series Project Gotham Racing, utilizing the same kudos system that rewards players for stylish driving, while at the same time punishing them if they mess up while attempting to do so. I suck at both this and Project Gotham. I'm much better at arcade racers with more exaggerated physics like Burnout. Despite this, I kept playing because, in keeping with that Sega arcade philosophy of improvement resulting in a more enjoyable game, I wanted to push myself to make the most of the kudos mechanic. Also, much like Sega Marine Fishing, the vibes in this game are exquisite. The game will take the time set on your Dreamcast internal clock, and automatically set the time zones for all of the cities featured in the game. So if it's morning in San Francisco, it'll be nighttime in Tokyo, and all of the racing you'll be doing is complemented by a romantic Eurobeat soundtrack that serves as a spiritual successor to the soundtracks featured in Sonic 3D Blast on Saturn and Sonic R, complete with the same composer and TJ Davis on vocals. You can't go wrong.
I thought my life had just begun, and now that you have gone, how could I be so wrong? When I'm dreaming of you, is there nothing I can do, baby, to make you love me?
Speaking of great soundtracks, talking about Jet Set Radio is pretty much inevitable when mentioning the Dreamcast, and for good reason. The game is an artistic embodiment of punk street culture of the era, all while being a damn fine game in its own right. It's kind of like a collectathon platformer if your primary method of traversal was inline skating, and you skate around Tokyo tagging everything in sight while evading authorities. Its cel-shaded art style was one of the first in the medium, and it was brilliantly executed. The sharp outlines mask the polygon count of each character model, and give way to stylized, colorful designs that feel like a cross between a Saturday morning cartoon and graffiti art come to life. With flourishes like motion-captured dancing and outlandish accessories and clothes, giving the game identity beyond just punk. It's something more, something with a voice of its own. Jet Set Radio is still kind of an early 3D game, and that can lead to its controls feeling a bit floaty, clunky, and imprecise, but I promise that you can acclimate to them. There's nothing quite like stringing together a combo of techniques on terrain like billboards and rails, while tagging the walls along the way. Of course, the thing most people remember this game for is its sense of style, and that extends to its soundtrack. In addition to contributions from Toronto and Richard Jacques, this would be the game to establish Hideki Naganuma's trademark style, stemming from his work as a DJ. Sampling and mixing elements together to create something funky and unlike anything you've heard before. Another thing I like about the soundtrack is, when you switch over to the youth gang in America, the music shifts to accompany their story too, meaning that you get hit with Rob Zombie's Dragula as soon as you take control of Cube. It's awesome. I do think Jet Set Radio Future on Xbox is the better game, for its improved controls, scope, and the successful, imaginative evolution of the game's visual identity, but Jet Set Radio is still a phenomenal game, and absolutely deserving of the praise it garnered upon release. Something about it speaks to me even today. It still feels so original and so viscerally pro-art that I get sentimental thinking about it. To me, it is what the Dreamcast was all about. It was about letting the games speak for themselves and paving the way for the rest of the industry, doing things no one had ever done from both technical and artistic perspectives. Which brings us to our next game, once again a product of Sonic Team. We've spoken at length about the Dreamcast's internet connectivity being crucial to the system standing out, but we have yet to talk about a game that not only made it mandatory to get the full experience, but also completely revolutionized the industry with its use of it. Phantasy Star Online is that game. Before this game, MMOs had to be restricted to computers. They got around this by ensuring each mission in Phantasy Star Online is instanced for up to 4 players, and the game is structured more like a multiplayer dungeon crawler. I find it far more reminiscent of Diablo and Monster Hunter, the latter it almost certainly influenced, than something with persistent multiplayer like World of Warcraft, though you still can hang out with a ton of people in lobbies. You create your character, pick a class, and gradually work to loot better items and weapons. The entire game is loot-driven, really. Your basic combos are a means to an end once you've mastered timing your button presses, and you need to be constantly feeding your mag to level it up as well. You can, of course, work with your friends to solve dungeons and fight enemies and bosses efficiently, which comes especially in handy when you find yourself under-leveled after already being deep into a dungeon. But the game is all about that loot, and hoping you stumble upon a red item. This might sound simple and kind of boring, but it ended up being surprisingly addictive for my friends and I. Not to mention, there's a story to follow the whole time. Let me put it this way. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for the first time lately. I'm currently on Heavensward. When the game is asking a lot of you and your party, the combat is incredible, but that isn't always what's happening. I've come to learn that MMOs are just not the kind of game you play for consistently engaging gameplay. Sometimes a quest is just going to be another step along the path to the good stuff. That has not pushed me away from either game in any way. I know it's something I can come back to in short bursts, because the payoff of that main scenario, that awesome raid, that dungeon run or boss fight, is always going to be worthwhile. I level my Black Knight class by doing roulettes to see just what new abilities I can get kitted out with when my next class quest opens up. In PSO, the same philosophy applies. It's all about leveling up you and your mag and collecting loot with a group of people you want to hang out with, so that you can tackle harder missions, reap greater rewards, and see how the story is going to unfold. That notion made the game incredibly relaxing and a good time with friends. And hey, if you don't have friends, Sonic Team thought of that too. They implemented a chat system where you could say specific phrases, and those phrases would be broadcast into different languages depending on what another player's system language was, which tore down the language barrier that would have otherwise inhibited the social aspect of the game. Of course, you can still use text chat with a Dreamcast keyboard, but that system, in spite of the amount of work it takes to translate all of those possible phrases, ensured the game's player base would be able to communicate with one another, no matter what. Now, I've been talking about this game from a modern perspective because I did not have any way of playing it when I was younger, not on Dreamcast, GameCube, or Xbox. Imagine how mind-blowing a game like this would have been at launch. It It was the first console game to attempt an MMORPG format, and it was beloved by those who played it. This game right here is why the Dreamcast was so ahead of its time, once again from both technical and artistic perspectives. Initially, subscriptions were free in North America until the release of version 2, where the game adopted a subscription model here to match the rest of the world. Then the game was ported to GameCube, being one of the only games to support the broadband adapter, and it would be ported again to Xbox and Windows soon after. This splintered the player base until the game's servers were discontinued in 2007, but as of today, we have custom and private servers that allow people to play online together, no matter if they're playing on Dreamcast, GameCube, Windows, or Xbox. Yes, certain servers actually allow for crossplay, something that not even Sonic Team was able to accomplish. For this video, I used a PC-only custom server called Affinia, but if you want to play Phantasy Star Online as it was in the year 2000, you absolutely can, thanks to the dedicated efforts of the community. There's too many games to talk about here, man. There are plenty of huge games I still haven't talked about, like Resident Evil Code Veronica. Despite playing it for the first time 6 years ago, and thinking the story was complete nonsense, I do recall the gameplay and atmosphere leaving a huge impression on me. I found it genuinely tense and frightening, and up to scratch with the other numbered Resident Evil games, which were ported to Dreamcast as well. We've talked a lot about the Dreamcast dreaming big and leading the way for games and hardware to follow. I could be here all day if I kept going. But for our final game of this chapter, I wanted to talk about a game that paved the way in a manner that some see as a negative, but I instead see as a showcase for what pointless and excruciating attention to detail can do for a game when handled well. And just from that description, you're probably thinking, oh, he's talking about Shenmue. And yeah, I am. But I actually really like Shenmue. Shenmue is yet another pioneer when it comes to the Dreamcast and its games. It popularized open worlds, quick-time events, and detailed interactivity in action-adventure games. And oh man is Shenmue detailed, some would say to a fault. Day by day, you walk through Yokosuka, talking to people to gather information, buying things at shops when you need them, and even working part-time in a forklift at one point. It's all about just taking things day by day and appreciating the atmosphere of the town you exist in while working toward your goal. I say this about Shenmue and it might sound similar to a game I talked about in my PlayStation 2 retrospective, Boku no Natsuyasumi 2. But whereas Boku 2 had you fill each day with fun activities, stories, and a desire to help and get to know everyone on the island, it feels like Shenmue's daily activities were designed to be as unfun as possible. Gradually unraveling the mystery of Ryo's father's death by following a breadcrumb trail of random conversations, waiting for scheduled appointments by training either in the arcade or an empty parking lot for battles that don't show up frequently until Disc 3, where you will be driving a forklift for several hours. Shenmue contains the slowest of slow burns I have ever seen in a game, and at times, it made me yearn for something else. As Game Informer wrote rather scathingly when the game first released, determining your character's next move requires little more than talking to someone who will then tell you who to see or where to go. All that's left is a guy walking around an amazingly detailed environment. If I wanted to experience that, I could see it in another game with proven endless entertainment value. It's called Life. Now, despite what I said, I vehemently disagree with this stance on Shenmue, because at the end of the day, when I laid my head on my pillow at night, I found myself genuinely excited to wake up the next day, return to Shenmue, and drive my forklift around again and carry cargo from one place to the next. In truth, Shenmue reminded me to cherish every day from a different and more realistic perspective. And in order to understand why I feel this way, we should examine Ryo as a protagonist. As Ryo pursues his father's killer, recklessly in blatant disregard for the feelings of those that care about him, his life is passing him by. The player is meant to take notice of those things that make Shenmue special while Ryo is absorbed by that pursuit. The people you meet, the city you live in, the kitten your neighbor is raising, your American friend Tom, and the man at the pizzeria that will gladly teach you some Italian.
Mario, would you teach me some Italian?
Oh, of course. Buono means good.
Okay, thanks.
In that regard, Ryo is a great showcase for how men, young and old, especially in that era, refuse to think deeply about their feelings or express them to someone they trust. They just act. Ryo's actions make his immediate family sick with worry, while ignoring Nozomi's feelings for him, all because he is preoccupied with vengeance. He will certainly become stronger along the way, but it is as Master Chen says.
You should not waste your life on revenge.
As a game, Shenmue demands patience from the player as the days go by. Embracing this and finding things to do as the time passes will ultimately allow you to appreciate the game a lot more. It is painful to be so patient and interact with the mundane details this game packs into it, but that's just how the game is designed, and it is exactly why I was so compelled to see Ryo's journey through to the end. Combat is exceptionally rare in the first 2 discs, and by disc 3 it becomes interspersed throughout your workdays, but just when you think you've settled into the mundanity of your job, something happens that leads to Shenmue having an explosive and gripping finale, to the point where you'll thank yourself for spending your free time training and leveling up your individual moves, or even spending time at the arcade playing Hang On. It is difficult for me to recommend this game to just anyone, despite immensely respecting it and ultimately enjoying it for everything it is. I just value the idiosyncrasies in high-budget, uniquely designed, atmospheric games. I think upon release, it was unlike anything out there, and it is a testament to the Dreamcast's pioneering qualities in more ways than one. Its uniqueness is still true today, but for very different reasons. That said, Shenmue is beautiful, and all I can really say is, for all of the dreaming we do about being in a better place, wishing for the future to arrive sooner, there is a sublime beauty in the mundanity of everyday life. Before you know it, everything can change, and you'll be left wanting what you previously had. Be sure to spend your time wisely. And you know what? Shenmue 2 has been structured in the same manner so far. For my first few hours with the game, I lost all of my money to a thief, so I had to take on odd jobs all over the place, like playing Lucky Hit with people for hours and losing every time, as well as lifting crates with a character that has the best grunts I have ever heard. And yet, I found acclimating myself to Hong Kong an extremely compelling experience. It really sells the idea that there's no going back for Ryo. No matter what happens, he needs to settle in and work hard. Just like the first game, in a new context. While Shenmue may have been at least partially responsible for the intense focus on detail in high-budget games that is rarely in service of a game being fun, I think it proves that deliberate detail or mundanity can be essential from an artistic point of view when used to juxtapose something like the narrative or gameplay, and that is what Shenmue excels at most of all. And now, just for fun, a write-up on Shenmue's violations of forklift protocol, thanks to knowledge from my friend Aster. Freight is constantly being carried high up in the air rather than low to the ground, which is especially bad if the freight is heavy. If the crate falls for one reason or another, it could not only ruin cargo, but it could also very likely kill someone, driving around in an open area with no safety guards up against the open ocean. A forklift or a person could easily topple over into the water. Workers are not wearing any safety equipment aside from some people maybe wearing hard hats. No safety glasses, no steel-toed boots, no reflective vests, etc. Drivers do not stop and wait for others to pass. Clearly their destination is more important than the safety of others. Gotta make quota. The amount of times I've had to blare my horn to get these cornballs out of the way are uncountable. Not to mention, some of them are driving around with their forks up in the air, ready to skewer some unsuspecting pedestrians. Oh yeah, that too. There are just pedestrians walking around out here where cargo is being transported. Overall, Ryo is lucky to be alive, and not just because he's chasing down a criminal organization. With the Dreamcast being such a huge success at launch in North America, no one could have imagined that the system would only have 18 months to live from there. As early as January 2000, the Dreamcast and Sega as a whole began to struggle. Dreamcast sales were sluggish more so in Japan than North America, but it led to the company experiencing another consecutive year of financial losses. On top of that, Sega had to prepare for what would be a devastating blow from the thorn in their side that plagued them during the Saturn's life, Sony. The PlayStation 2 was not only set to be more powerful than the Dreamcast by a decent margin, but it would also have a DVD-ROM drive, meaning it could play DVDs, in addition to games being able to store more data. This made it an immediately more appealing console to upgrade to than the Dreamcast, and it was backwards compatible with the vast majority of PS1 games. All for $2.99, just like the PS1, making it not only one of the cheaper DVD players on the market, but also doubling the console as a 2-in-1 entertainment powerhouse. Competing against all of this, even with the Dreamcast's lower price of $199 and a potential DVD-ROM upgrade on the table, was an insurmountable task, and Sega got desperate. The company went all in on the Dreamcast's built-in modem in 2000, offering a $150 rebate to those that purchased 2 years of their online service SegaNet from Sega.com. In addition, Sega further reduced the price of the Dreamcast to $149, meaning that if you paid for SegaNet, you would be fully reimbursed for buying the console. This, as you'd expect, led to Sega hemorrhaging even more money. By 2001, the Dreamcast had fallen short of sales expectations, primarily because those that could not get a PS2 at launch chose to just wait until they were able, rather than caving and buying a Dreamcast. Ultimately, in early 2001, Sega realized they were no match for the PS2, and rather than attempting to fight it, they chose to become platform agnostic and restructure as a third-party publisher, bringing their games to all platforms. This announcement would be made in January, and the Dreamcast was discontinued worldwide on March 31st, 2001, after only 18 months on the market in North America. The announcement once again left both consumers and developers out in the cold, even if industry insiders saw it coming. The aforementioned Metropolis Street Racer sold poorly due to Sega announcing the Dreamcast would be no more the month the game was released in North America, while a Japanese release was cancelled altogether. Many who supported the system during this time were understandably upset by this news. But Sega found far more success as a third-party publisher, and would finally turn a profit in 2004 after years of losses caused by the Saturn and Dreamcast. Games would continue to be released for the Dreamcast throughout 2001 and 2002 though, with a few of them being considered some of the greatest games on the console period. Not much really needs to be said about Sonic Adventure 2, right? I may not love every decision it makes, and I might prefer the first game, but I can totally understand why it is so beloved. I grew up with this game just as I did the first. Its scoring system made replaying levels a ton of fun. It's full of memorable set pieces just like the first game. I have a video about 3D Sonic that you can watch if you want to hear me talk about it, because there's just too much to go over here. It is regarded as the golden child of 3D Sonic by many, defining Sonic for many fans my age, and I can't tell you just how many times I've replayed these levels for A ranks and more items for my Chow. The Chow Garden's complexities only expanded with this game, including the Hero and Dark Gardens, more variables to consider. It is an entire game in and of itself. What a wonderful swan song for Sonic Team to grace the system with. The aforementioned Sakura Wars 4 was an early production when the Dreamcast was on its way out, and it would be written as a farewell to the series, being met with acclaim in Japan when it came out in 2002. Finally, United Game Artists, coming off of the success of Space Channel 5, decided to create 2 more rhythm games as a farewell of their own to the system. One of these was Space Channel 5 Part 2, and the other was Rez. Space Channel 5 was more of an interactive 1960s music video. It was a lot of fun to perform well at, its art direction was solid, especially in its 60s influences, and its combination of pre-rendered backgrounds with in-engine models. And its challenge was welcome. But it didn't have a whole lot going on beyond the 2 hours it took to beat it. Rez was also similarly short, but its game design was infinitely more compelling to me. And it left such a strong impression on me that I didn't mind its length in the slightest. House and techno-trance music, especially when played live, give both the DJ and the audience a chance to watch a piece of music grow and evolve, and both can participate in its evolution and endless possibilities. United Game Artists transmuted that feeling into an interactive experience wherein the player participates in creating that music, inherently allowing each measure to sound fresh as they blast their way through each area. All the while, they play as a hacker on a journey through an overwhelmed and corrupted cyberspace to ascertain where we came from and where we are headed in a technological revolution. Much like that sense of thematic cohesion, the rail shooter gameplay is just as sharp as the game it takes from, Panzer Dragoon Zwei, transforming it into a genre-bending rhythm action game with style and substance that oozes with the very personality and artistry that made the Dreamcast so legendary. Rez is such a cool game. Sadly, it skipped the Dreamcast in North America, releasing only in Europe and Japan until it came to PS2. The final North American Dreamcast game was NHL 2K2, released exclusively for the system on February 12, 2002. The final Dreamcast games released in PAL regions were all released on the same day, April 26, 2002. Evil Twins Cyprian's Chronicles, a game I actually meant to play for this video but didn't, Cannon Spike, Razor Freestyle Scooter, Heavy Metal Geomatrix, and Conflict Zone. The last officially licensed Dreamcast game overall would be released in Japan on March 8, 2007. Wait, what? 2007? Yeah, so let's back up a bit. Remember how I mentioned that the Sega Naomi arcade hardware made porting to Dreamcast easy? Well, it continued to be used throughout the 2000s, and since porting was so easy, many developers figured, why not? This led to the Dreamcast surviving well into the 2000s. However, aside from a few oddball games like Sonic Team's own Puyo Pop Fever in 2004, which only saw a North American release on GameCube, these final years were mostly home to shmups and eroge. Okay, well, they were visual novels and they did have erotic scenes when they were released on Windows, but when ported to Dreamcast, obviously all of that was removed. And that's no fun, that's like giving me a pizza with nothing on it.
Hey Jimmy, give me a cheese with nothing. Nothing?
Regardless of this, some of these late Dreamcast games are regarded as some of the console's finest, which is especially the case for one of Treasure's many masterpieces, Ikaruga. The polarity mechanic takes some getting used to, but it flips typical bullet hell design by having you switch polarity to eat bullets and charge your special attack. Depending on what difficulty you're playing on, enemies will return fire in accordance with your polarity, which can either give you a chance to fill up your special meter, or it might result in more bullets to avoid, because shooting with the opposite polarity of your enemy results in dealing more damage. You can also get a chain going if you continuously shoot enemies of the opposite polarity. Basically, it's all about a game of risk-reward. It gives you an unprecedented amount of control over the field once you know what you're doing, and it makes for an excellent shooter, one of the best I've ever played. It's not easy to achieve that control, and honestly I'm still not there yet, but when I have those fleeting moments of performing well, it's awesome. I'm gonna continue improving at this game just to prove to myself that I can do it. It's like the game says, I will not die until I achieve something. Even though the ideal is high, I never give in. Therefore, I never die with regrets. Words to live by. The developer Milestone released a few Naomi shooters of their own on the Dreamcast. Now we're getting obscure. The first was Chaos Field, which attempts a similar concept to Ikaruga, through the primary mechanic allowing you to switch to the titular field to deal more damage and use special weapons, but enemies also fire more bullets there. It's not quite as compelling as the polarity system in Ikaruga, but the music is insanely good. Their next game was Raturgy. The game uses a cel-shaded art style a la Jet Set Radio, and is oozing with that Y2K atmosphere, complete with characters communicating with you through cell phone emails, and your lives being represented by cells in a battery. The central game mechanics honestly make for my favorite of Milestone's Dreamcast games. In addition to the central weapons being so much fun to use, you can use a melee weapon to swat at enemies, projectiles, and even power-ups, upon which those power-ups will be juggled and will transform into a different power-up. You can then swat them over and over again to juggle them until you get a power-up you like. By collecting enough of these blue chips, you'll be able to use your shield, which sucks in power-ups, absorbs bullets, and makes you temporarily invincible. Hypothetically, if you're smart enough with your use of the shield and blue chip collecting, you can combo your shield into another immediate use of the shield over and over again. And when I'm able to pull this off, the surge of dopamine I get is euphoric. I am unstoppable. Although it's harder to do this in the original Raturgy, the more recent spin-off Raturgy Swag, yes, that's the actual name of the game, is designed around comboing shields together, and you can pretty clearly observe how invincible this makes you when you know what you're doing. This retroactively made me better at comboing in the original game, as you can see here. Milestone's last Dreamcast shooter was Todos, and it would be the final officially licensed Dreamcast game when it was released in 2007. Yes, it came out the same year as Halo 3, and that kind of blows my mind. Todos borrows its systems, weapons, and cel-shaded art style from Raturgy, but you can level up your weapons through pickups dropped by enemies all the way to level 100, and you have a few other tools at your disposal too. Since it builds on Raturgy's gameplay, I couldn't help but enjoy this one just as much. The story is also much darker in this one, as you play as an orphan girl seeking answers regarding her parents' deaths, and it takes place during a war between heaven and earth, where people like her and her sister are being experimented on by the government to create human-angel hybrids and escape from this doomed world. There's also a song on this soundtrack called You Can't F*** Me, so there you go. Oh, and speaking of that soundtrack, they just don't make them like they used to, man. At first, only Chaos Field was released outside of Japan on GameCube. Raturgy and Todos went unreleased until the Milestone Shooting Collection on Wii was released in North America as Ultimate Shooting Collection, with probably the most generic box art and title I have ever seen. Had I not done my research, I would have never known these games were available in English on this collection. Technically, the Dreamcast did see a little more officially licensed action after this date. In 2003, a horizontal shooter called Border Down was released. It's a fun game, nothing amazing or anything, but certainly enjoyable. It saw continued interest years after its launch on Dreamcast, to the point where a Japanese retailer requested Sega and G-Rev run another print of the game in January 2008. And this actually ended up happening. Neither print sold well, by the way, making it one of the more expensive games in the Dreamcast library today. And that completes the tragic tale of the Dreamcast. Though its life was short, aside from the continued support in Japan from a small corner of the industry, it dreamt big, and I don't think video games would be the same without it. From its pioneering internet functionality and the sheer creativity, ingenuity, and passion observable in its best games, we all owe a lot to this system. And yet, despite dreaming of a bold future for the industry, the system also marked the end of an era. Selling a system on quality arcade ports would no longer be the norm. New games would become major blockbuster events, and it seemed as though the concept of just realizing a unique creative vision, uncompromised, would no longer be enough to ensure financial sustainability. Games had to keep getting bigger in scope. That's what general audiences craved, and still crave. The PlayStation 2 allowed these relics of the past to persist for some time, but it also changed everything. The Dreamcast marked a transitional period for games as we knew them, but it also had everything that they used to be, and that's why I absolutely love the thing. For as much as it dreamed of a brighter future, it learned from Sega's past, and made the present worth living in. Homebrew developers have continued to keep the system alive. Not only have most Dreamcast games had their online functionality completely restored, thanks to things like DreamPie and Dreamcast Live, so you could hop into a match in Quake 3 right now if you really wanted to, but most Dreamcast consoles allowed you to play burn-to games so long as you had the right number on the bottom of your console, and you can replace the disk drive just as you could on the Saturn to give the console more longevity, both of which will allow you to play original games that were developed unofficially, as well as English translations of Japanese-only games, and even direct ports that fans have made using decompiled source code. Super Mario 64, Star Fox 64, Ocarina of Time, all of these games have been successfully ported to Dreamcast. But there's one port in particular that allows a what-if scenario to come full circle. When the Dreamcast was still kicking, DMA Design, now Rockstar North, were huge fans of Phantasy Star Online. Thus, when prototyping Grand Theft Auto 3 shortly after 2 was completed, they were aiming to release it on the Dreamcast. Rockstar North's technical director even said that the system would have been able to handle the game, but they quickly realized the Dreamcast would not be a commercially viable platform to release it on, switching to the PS2 after about 4 months. It's fun to imagine a world where the Dreamcast survived, all thanks to GTA 3, or perhaps a world where GTA failed to catch on due to its release on a dying platform. But I bring this story to your attention because very recently, it was proven that the Dreamcast could have handled the game. Grand Theft Auto 3 was ported in its entirety to the Dreamcast a little over a year ago, and you can play it from start to finish. From what I've played of it, it's a jaw-dropping port. Yes, sacrifices are made to keep the game running above 25 frames per second, but you can absolutely play the game this way. Oh, and Vice City received the same treatment last year too. Needless to say, the Dreamcast in some form is still alive and well. While the story of the Dreamcast is tragic, I don't feel a sense of melancholy over its short lifespan. Rather, I respect it for dreaming big, ultimately delivering, and influencing the entire industry to boot. It is a testament to the notion that dreams can be made real, even if they are sometimes fleeting. Eventually, we all have to wake up. There will be other dreams, so there's no need to despair. Again, the word dream has many meanings, but just as much as they are vivid and imaginative images presented to us during sleep, a dream can also be a goal. Something that motivates you, something you want to grasp with your own two hands. We as human beings have a tendency to want what we don't have. It's natural. It gives us something to strive for, and it helps us hold on to hope. It's why I'm still here, and why I'm still dreaming. I need to live, for the sake of those dreams. Which brings us to our final game. While the Saturn had great games, most of them would be criminally overlooked due to the system failing miserably outside of Japan. I felt strangely responsible for giving those games a chance to shine when writing that video. However, with the Dreamcast, these games have gone on to have fruitful legacies of their own, and have mostly been widely re-released. I also feel as though the Dreamcast's heavy hitters were more numerous due to the hardware being easier to develop for, and the system being more widely adopted while it was still on the market. The Dreamcast's biggest games all received wide attention and have mostly sold well, been re-released, or have generally been honored in some regard. No Dreamcast masterpiece suffered tragedy like Panzer Dragoon Saga did. There is one Dreamcast heavy hitter that remains unaccounted for today though, and even on release, it sold poorly. It was only re-released once on GameCube, and it has not been seen again outside of Easter eggs in other games. It's Skies of Arcadia. Skies of Arcadia is tonally the polar opposite of Panzer Dragoon Saga. I do feel that the game did have a prevailingly hopeful narrative, but it's hopeful in the same way that Berserk ends up giving people hope. That world is devastated and dying, but at the heart of it all are two people who find love despite everything. Skies of Arcadia, on the other hand, is a game filled with the promise of exploration and friendship and hope. This might sound juvenile in comparison, but Skies of Arcadia demonstrates that dreams are things that anyone, no matter who they are or at what point they are at in their lives, can carry proudly. It demonstrates that if you feel like those dreams are slipping away, your friends will be there to catch you. The game is excellent at making you want to make a difference in its world, one that reflects our own, with a kingdom drunk with power making its citizens pay the price. Instead of dwelling on the dour implications of its political themes, which the game still very much treats with respect, it instead makes you want to follow your dreams and inspire others to do the same. In spite of everything going on and how awful things are, you persist. As long as there are dreamers who have the courage to pursue their dreams, the world will have heroes. Let me give you an example. Vice's optimism is a primary reason I remember this game so fondly, and his optimism always manages to feel genuine due to the excellent narrative in place. At one point, Vice is separated from his crew and stranded on the abandoned Crescent Island. Rather than wallowing in his despair, he instead picks himself up, builds a base for himself, and survives, not ever wanting to lose sight of his dream. His philosophy also affects a group of sailors he meets upon arriving in Esperanza, the name itself an intentional misspelling of the Spanish word for hope. They can't make it through the Dark Rift and are just sitting around drinking, having given up and essentially waiting to die. They tell Vice about the Dark Rift, and Vice lets them have it. Thanks for telling me about the Dark Rift. Before I go, I just want to say that I've never met a more pitiful bunch in my life. If you lose sight of one dream, replace it with another. Think about how much you could have accomplished in the time that you've spent here. Just because you couldn't cross the Dark Rift, are you just going to sit here for the rest of your life? Because you tried something once and failed, are you going to throw the rest of your life away? There's a whole world out there to see. Don't you have any desire to sail again? In the aftermath, the sailors watch Vice and his crew take on Gregorio, grow inspired, and the man that Vice chastised, Don, eventually joins his crew. Vice's philosophy perfectly mirrors how Sega bounced back from the Saturn with the Dreamcast, and though they lost sight of their dream for the console, they replaced it with another upon going third party. It sounds so silly to be likening a business's recovery to the story of an RPG, but Skies of Arcadia perfectly embodies not only the Dreamcast's whole story, but also what I think we can take from it. In yet another example of just how much the Dreamcast influenced games moving forward, I honestly feel like it might have been a direct influence on The Wind Waker, my favorite game of all time. One of the greatest aspects of the game is the sheer amount of sky you have to explore and chart for yourself. By exploring, you can build a crew and allow their abilities to benefit you in both naval and turn-based ground combat. And each of them have stories to be told. You can take on bounties to become stronger, hunt for secret treasure, explore unknown skies to make new discoveries. A lot of it echoed what I loved about Wind Waker, and Vice's unwavering resolve, his intense desire to make something of himself, also reminded me of how The Wind Waker was very much about a boy who wants to find his own definition of courage, unbeholden to the hero of time. If I, Liam Triforce for God's sake, am favorably comparing something to a Zelda game, you know it's gotta be good. That being said, I don't consider Skies of Arcadia one of my favorite RPGs like I do Panzer Dragoon Saga. I think enemy encounters are far too frequent, even on GameCube where they were supposedly lessened. I think major battles can take a long time on their own, even though you can skip SP animations, and ship battles are an endurance, and honestly, not really even that fun. They can take between 30 to 40 minutes, and the vast majority of that time is spent waiting for each action to play out. You pre-select each action and then wait to see what happens. You can't really account for certain actions that the enemy takes to the fullest extent, which is fine for the ground battles, as you are forced to adapt with each turn, but with ship battles, it just means you'll have to spend more turns waiting as you repair and devise a strategy. I also think the game's dungeon design is incredibly flat and straightforward, with basic problems to solve. They feel artificially lengthened by the high encounter rate, too. For what it's worth, though, the core combat of Skies of Arcadia, while familiar, is strong, especially thanks to the focus mechanic, allowing you to take turns to build SP in order to use crucial abilities. It's like the Psych mechanic in Dragon Quest VIII, but it beat that game to the punch by a few years. Also, the game takes a while to truly open up, but I assure you, getting there is well worth it. When you can explore the open sky at your own pace, it is liberating. There really isn't much else out there like this game. Despite my problems with it, I have no problems recommending it. Please give it a shot. It could end up being your favorite RPG of all time. Who knows? I feel it has the capacity to be that game, for sure. Sadly, Skies of Arcadia did not sell very well. It didn't bomb like Panzer Dragoon Saga did, and it has a larger fanbase than that game ever did, but it deserved far better. Of course, Overworks picked themselves up and kept going, working on Sakura Wars 3 and 4, while members of Overworks would go on to develop Valkyria Chronicles, a series that remains successful today. If you lose sight of one dream, replace it with another. Skies of Arcadia is everything I aim to convey about the Dreamcast. It is both a fulfilling realization of a world that those who love RPGs would want to be real, much like a good dream, and an embodiment of why hope is so important to surviving in this world. Nothing is impossible. As Vice says, impossible is just a word to let people feel good about themselves when they quit. As much as I've achieved in my life, I still have dreams of my own that I will work to achieve until I drop dead. And my greatest dream...
Do you like yourself? Well, you should like yourself. You can't count on anybody else to like you.
My greatest dream might actually be within reach.
Good for you.
So this video took a long time to make, and I apologize for the wait. I hope it was worth it. Once again, I'd like to thank Surfshark for sponsoring this video. I say this time and time again, but they are absolute legends, not just because of what they offer, but because of how lenient they are with creative ads like on Tomska and Friends, and they've even funded episodes of his show Tryhards, which I love dearly. Surfshark protects your anonymity online through its award-winning VPN. You can protect your data on public Wi-Fi from prying eyes, something that I personally do on my phone with Surfshark VPN when traveling, mask your online activity by changing your virtual location and IP address, block ads and trackers when doing online shopping to avoid creepy targeted ads, and access content not available in your country. A notion that is incredibly relevant these days, no matter the platform we're talking about. It's more than just a VPN, and I use it for all of these things regularly, on my computer and my smartphone, and from my experience with both, I have nothing but praise. It protects all of my devices no matter where I am or what I need to do. And you'll never know what I get up to. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, Surfshark VPN has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no harm in giving it a shot. If you head to surfshark.com/Triforce or use code Triforce at checkout, you'll get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN free. That's 4 months F-R-E-E, man. Thanks again, Surfshark. I've been Liam Triforce. Thanks for watching.